Previously, on The Men Who Built America, Frontiersmen. 40 years after Daniel Boone crossed the Appalachians, the American frontier now reaches as far west as the Great Plains. Famed Shawnee war chief Tecumseh falls in battle, and with him dies the dream of a pan-Indian homeland. Fire! Andrew Jackson defeats Great Britain in the War of 1812, a victory that propels him to the presidency. His bitter rival, Davy Crockett, seeks a fresh start in the Mexican territory of Texas.
You somebody like you, Crockett.
What he finds instead
Haller, Texas!
Haller, Texas!
is a fight for freedom that will make him a legend. Among their commanders is celebrated frontiersman Davy Crockett. Outside the walls, close to 5,000 Mexican troops, led by the ruthless General Santa Anna, surround the mission.
The Texians believed that Santa Anna's troops were 2 months out. But once Crockett got to the Alamo and it became clear that Santa Anna's troops were on the march and they were much closer than had been anticipated, there was no getting out of it at this point for Crockett.
All right, close it up. All right, down the walls. Let's go, go, go!
This massive, well-trained army, surrounding this little mission in the middle of the desert. The Alamo looks like a complete disaster waiting to happen.
Outnumbered 15 to 1, Crockett knows the odds of survival are bleak.
Man, there's a thing that happens when death's at the door. Most people don't know when the Reaper's gonna show up, right? You just kinda, hopefully you die in peace or you die quickly. When you see the Reaper standing outside the door and you know he's coming in here for us, your world just kind of lends perspective in that moment. What was important, what's not important, who I wish I would have talked to. Man, it's a hell of a thing to go through that.
Over the course of an hour, Crockett and the Texans repelled the Mexican advances 3 times. But Santa Anna is relentless, accepting heavy losses to breach the fortress.
Santa Anna sent his troops from many different sides, wave after wave after wave of men who scaled ladders and swarmed literally like locusts.
Davy Crockett did what many American patriots have done, and that is decide to stay and fight for a cause in the face of an attacking enemy. And it speaks volumes about him and about his character.
"90 minutes after the battle begins, the Mexican army takes the Alamo. Almost all of the fort's defenders are killed.
Most accounts suggest that Crockett was in some of the heaviest fighting and that he was one of the last remaining survivors. They were led out and executed right in front of Santa Ana. Then they were loaded into 3 separate human pyres and lit aflame. For Crockett to live this incredible life on the frontier and then die at the Alamo sealed him as legendary.
Davy Crockett was not this kind of backwoods outdoorsman entirely. He was a man with great political ambitions who got into trouble because he was also very independent-minded, so he wouldn't always play ball with the political establishment. Crockett was always the congressman of the little guy. It is that underdog struggle, fighting against a tyranny. And so the story of Davy Crockett going down swinging, fighting to the very last man, the very last breath, feeds the legend of the king of the wild frontier.
Word of the slaughter at the Alamo soon spreads across the country. Enraging Americans in Washington, President Andrew Jackson sees the defeat in Texas as a much bigger concern. By 1836, Mexico is a significant territorial rival in North America. Mexico controls land stretching from California to the border of Oregon, covering more than 1.7 million square miles. The U.S. hasn't added a new state since Missouri in 1821, and the promise of expansion west feels stalled.
Andrew Jackson was among those Americans who believed that Texas ought to be part of the United States. But Jackson was also a man with a keen strategic sense who wanted to strike at the right moment. Didn't want to have a war with Mexico just then. Didn't think the time was right.
If Texas can win its own independence, Jackson can bring it into the Union. Until then, his hands are tied. Fortunately for Jackson, one Texan sees the crushing loss at the Alamo as an opportunity. His name is Sam Houston.
Crockett and Sam Houston both served in Andrew Jackson's militia during the Creek War. Houston became famous for the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, where he was impaled through the groin with an arrow and had one of his other soldiers yank it out, and he just kept on fighting. And Houston also was really a rugged frontiersman.
Houston is now the leader of some 370 untrained men. They comprise the Army of Texas. And their fight for independence isn't over. To increase his numbers in the face of a much larger enemy, Houston calls on Texans to avenge Crockett's death and remember the Alamo.
way I see it.
The defeat at the Alamo ended up creating a great rallying cry of patriotism to fight for independence and to fight to the death, to fight to the end.
It is really important that we make sure.
Hundreds of angry Texans are drawn to the cause of independence. In just a month, Houston's army swells to nearly 1,000. They're positioned near the San Jacinto River, right in the path of General Santa Anna and 1,500 Mexican troops. Just 6 weeks after Crockett's death at the Alamo, Sam Houston takes his revenge, unleashing 900 furious Texans against a larger Mexican force. Santa Anna is camped near the San Jacinto River, where the Texans surprise them.
Ultimately, the Battle of San Jacinto only lasted 18 minutes. It was a chaotic 18 minutes. I don't think anyone expected the battle to go this way.
Over 630 Mexican soldiers are killed. The Texans suffer just 11 casualties. The crushing defeat leads to Mexico's surrender. And Texas finally wins independence. Back in Washington, D.C., Jackson welcomes the news. He's dreamed of Texas joining the U.S. for years, but the future of Texas is caught in the growing debate over slavery.
Congress wasn't willing to go along with annexation because Texas would enter the Union with slavery. And the addition of Texas would tip the balance in the Senate in favor of the pro-slavery side. The result of this was that Texas remained in this limbo for almost a decade.
In 1837, Jackson's presidency ends with one goal unfulfilled: a nation stretching all the way to the Pacific.
Andrew Jackson remained politically involved even after he retired. He was writing constant letters to people, giving very strong opinions about subject after subject after subject. And he was a man who believed in the expansion of the United States.
Expansion in the Southwest may be stalled, but the United States still has a claim in the Northwest. Located between British Canada and Mexico's holdings, the Oregon Territory is 250,000 square miles of disputed land, claimed by Britain, Native Americans, and the U.S. Lewis and Clark planted a flag here 4 decades ago. But to truly own it, the U.S. needs settlers, and that's a problem.
Americans really didn't know how to make it to Oregon. They were aware that there was very fertile farmland there, but no one was exactly sure how to make it there. And the entire prospect of traveling all the way across the nation was understandably daunting.
So in 1842, the United States Army sends a lieutenant from the Topographical Corps. His name is John C. Fremont. His mission, map a route from Missouri to Oregon that wagon trains of pioneers can safely travel.
John C. Fremont is actually an illegitimate son. He's born in poverty. He gets a mentor who actually goes on to become Secretary of War, who gets him a job surveying on the upper Mississippi River.
Fremont was vainglorious, arrogant, extremely ambitious. He didn't just want to be an explorer. He wanted to be a senator, he wanted to be president.
But he's never been west of the Mississippi. So he turns to the most skilled guide on the frontier, Kit Carson.
Kit Carson came from very humble origins. He had no formal education, he was illiterate, yet he was incredibly knowledgeable about the land of the West. He spoke multiple languages, he had relationships with native tribes, he knew the topography, he knew how to fight, he knew how to hunt. So here is somebody who had an invaluable knowledge that allowed him to go between both worlds.
Growing up, Carson was raised among frontier legends and mastered wilderness skills at an early age.
Carson was born in Kentucky, and he moved to Missouri as a child. His family became close friends with the Boones. They lived in a place called Boone's Lick. The Carson family, of course, was quite well aware of Daniel Boone and his legend. There was this desire to keep that westward movement going, to keep finding the frontier, to keep breaking ground. They were literally carving a civilization out of the wilderness there.
By age 16, he left home for good, hungry for adventure. Now with Fremont, he'll embark on a mission that will test all of his skills.
Fremont and Carson were a bit of an odd couple. They were completely opposite. Today we might say Fremont was a bit of a nerd and Carson was the cool kid. Carson was rugged and had experience in the frontier. He didn't seek fame or fortune. He didn't look for the spotlight. And so these two in many ways couldn't have been more different, but at the same time complemented each other very well.
Over the course of 5 months, Fremont and Carson lead some 36 men more than 2,000 miles through treacherous terrain, known for extreme changes in temperature and altitude.
This expedition was very, very dangerous. They were going to parts of the world that had never been explored before. They were a small party. They were relatively well armed, but they could always be ambushed. And certainly Fremont understood that and was very, very glad to have a guide like Carson.
On October 24th, 1843, Fremont and Carson finally reach the Oregon Territory.
We made it!
The path they chart becomes famous, the Oregon Trail. It paves the way for 400,000 settlers to move west in the decades to come, opening a new frontier and strengthening the United States' claim to the Northwest. 1 year after Carson and Fremont reach Oregon, the 1844 campaign for the presidency is underway.
In my opinion, our national security requires the annexation of Texas and should not stop until our domain extends from ocean to ocean.
Dark horse candidate James K. Polk believes in one thing above all: expanding America's borders. It's a vision he shares with his mentor, Andrew Jackson.
We're vulnerable here and here, and we're going to continue to be vulnerable unless we secure our borders to the south and to the west.
I couldn't agree more.
Andrew Jackson was known as Old Hickory because he was so tough. James K. Polk was known as Young Hickory, the idea being that he was a sapling in Andrew Jackson's model.
The last two presidents have done nothing. They're useless. They're afraid to act.
We have to take Texas. That has to be our first priority.
Polk was a younger generation of politician as the 1844 election approached. Jackson made clear that if you were a supporter of Andrew Jackson, you would go with James Polk.
Polk is able to capitalize on the legacy of Andrew Jackson. This idea that Americans have a right, in fact, a duty, a responsibility to continue to expand westward. That ultimately, it's this God-given dictate that they must fulfill. And Polk is able to turn that into a political agenda that serves his own political designs.
Polk rides a wave of popular support to the White House, then immediately delivers on his campaign promise. By his first days in office, Texas is on its way to becoming the 28th state, adding another 300,000 square miles to the nation.
So Polk does what I wish more presidential candidates would do. He says he's going to do this, this, and this, and he's only going to serve one term so that he can step on a lot of toes and deny the special interests and just pursue what he's elected to do.
The move fulfills Andrew Jackson's long-held dream to make Texas a state. But he doesn't live to see it come true.
Jackson's legacy was firmly establishing the principle that the ordinary people of America wielded political power. He was a self-made individual. He didn't have an inheritance. He didn't have name recognition handed to him. Today, people don't like Jackson largely because Jackson's hard Indian policy offends modern sensibilities. But what's forgotten about Jackson is his enormous positive contributions to hold the United States together in the face of challenges. Fire! And to defend the United States against foreign attack. Jackson recognized that the American experiment in self-government was an ongoing experiment, and its success was not guaranteed. He was the one who really imprinted that on the American psyche.
Jackson was emblematic of the contradictions of the American frontiersman. It was all jumbled together in this one huge figure, the impressive and the not so impressive, and the good and the appalling.
President Polk intends to build on Jackson's legacy, seizing the final open pieces of land in North America.
Polk isn't content to just look at Texas. Of course he wants Texas, but he's going to look broader beyond that. Polk wants the entire continent.
There's just one concern. Mexico controls most of it, including the biggest prize, California.
This is what I want, and this should not be hard to take.
Overflowing with natural resources, California also has over 3,000 miles of coastline, offering unparalleled access to Pacific trade, something every president since Jefferson has coveted.
California is a very desirable place in the world, very beautiful and very fertile. The Mexicans, of course, have their claim to it. The British are quite interested in settling it and expanding the northwestern territories for themselves.
Americans knew all about the glory of California, the immense wealth of California. There was a very important trade already going on in hides, animal hides. And above all, Americans were interested in the main ports.
Thank you, gentlemen. That will be all.
Polk is determined to take California. But with Congress unwilling to start a new war, he devises a secret plan. Using the Texas Rebellion as a model, he'll try to incite an uprising, and the man he chooses to lead his mission is the most famous explorer in America.
Mr. Fremont, I read your reports. I found them very interesting.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored. But I don't imagine you took time out of your schedule just to tell me that.
No. No, I didn't invite you here to talk about your past expeditions, but rather a future one.
Another trail to Oregon?
Not exactly. Officially, your mission will be to map out new territory and to discover the source of the Arkansas River. Unofficially, when you get to the Rocky Mountains, I want you to ride south into California. Once in California, I want you to talk to the local settlers. And, if you can, incite rebellion.
And you're sending me because you don't want it to appear to be a military operation.
Exactly.
I just need one thing from you.
And that would be?
Kit Carson.
President Polk was purposefully placing an explorer in a capacity to take advantage of any sort of instability in California. The idea that he's simply there in an official capacity as an explorer and a map maker, Polk needed to provide plausible deniability.
With around 60 heavily armed men, Fremont moves towards California, tasked with inciting a rebellion without starting a war. John Fremont and Kit Carson are on their way to California, part of President Polk's covert scheme to extend U.S. borders all the way to the coast.
Polk was an outspoken expansionist. He wanted Texas, he wanted California, he wanted Oregon. He was going to push out the American frontier all the way to the Pacific.
Disguised as a surveying mission, their real goal is to find American settlers and incite them into rebelling against Mexico.